What's going on, everyone? I hope everyone had an amazing day. I was expecting the market to have more downside. I was saying everything looked very bearish in yesterday's video. And now, essentially, I'm going to go ahead and talk about what I think can happen next. We're going to talk about the SPY, the NASDAQ, the IWM, the 30-year bond, large tech stocks, the crypto market, put everything together so we get a holistic view. Is that the proper term? I get a holistic view of the entire markets to really drive home what I think can end up happening. All right. So, of course, if you were following me on Twitter, you would see that I didn't post anything new. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about everything now. All right. So, without further ado, let's get started with the video. So, let's take this one piece at a time. All right. So, this is the SPY. All right. The RSI, from a technical standpoint, the RSI is falling lower. Technically, we still have a bit more room to go to the downside in terms of the RSI, right? So we're still at 36. Technically, before we get oversold, there's another 6 or 7 points. Okay, so there's still technically more room to the downside on the SPY for the RSI. The MACD is also starting to fall lower as well. So we technically have another day, maybe another day or two, for the MACD to continue falling lower as well. And the lower level of the Bollinger Band is sharply falling, which means that there is clear weakness to the downside for the SPY. Okay, so in my tweet, I said, in a perfect world, we fall lower tomorrow and we play a bounce either tomorrow or the day after once things are much more overextended to the downside. So today, you either buy into lotto puts or start scaling into longer term calls for 2 months out. And the reason for that is because I do think, so the healthiest thing for the market would be if we have a really nice flush down tomorrow. And if we open red and have a much more severe red day tomorrow as well. Okay. That would give us the potential for the RSI to get much closer to oversold. And that would essentially make the MACD oversold as well. So then we can start playing a bounce. Okay. So right now the SPY is basically telling me that there is at least maybe 1 or 2 days to the downside left. Right now is not the time to buy into any short-term calls because there's clearly all of the indicators are showing more downside. This candlestick pattern is also, I mean, this is a huge, strong, really strong move to the downside. And we close below 420. So everything combined, this is not a bullish setup. There's still more room to the downside. And the more abrupt, aggressive move we have to the downside, the better it'll be for us for a nice rip to the upside. And what's crazy is we got into lotto calls on this close. And next time, not only are we going to probably have to get into some lotto calls, we're probably going to have to also get into some longer term calls so that we can get this whole move to the downside as well. So SPY clearly looks very, very bearish. All right, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the IWM. Mr. Russell. So the Russell 2000 clearly also looks very, very bearish. All right, the lower level of the Bollinger Band is falling as well. The RSI still has a lot more room to go to the downside, only because the IWM was like the leading indice for the past month. So the indicators are going to look much more bullish, right? And the MACD is already oversold. So that's bullish as well, okay? So the RSI still is up here, and the MACD now just crossed below. So technically, we could have another downside day. The IWM is still showing more strength. So this 193 level is going to be very important now for the IWM moving forward. These indicators are still showing more downside potential. So just be careful. There's still technically more room to the downside for the IWM and the SPY. And before we continue on with the IWM, 415 is going to be very, very important for the SPY. If 415 breaks, then we're most likely going to come back and retest these lows over here. So keep that in mind for the SPY. So now going back to the IWM, 193 is very important. If that breaks, we're most likely going to come back, retest 190. Oh my God. And then if that happens, I'm not sure if that would even happen, to be honest. But if we break below 193 and then 190, then the safest bet would be that we're going to come back and retest this trend line. But I don't think it gets that bad. But if it does, you know what we're going to be doing. We're going to be buying the crap out of the dips. So, but no, I mean, that would just be too good to be true, to be honest. Like, if we fall that low and come back and retest this trend line off of this drop here, that would make the RSI very oversold. That would make the MACD very oversold. We would be trading outside the lower level of the Bollinger Band, depending on how fast we fall, right? But yeah, I mean, let's just take this one day at a time. The SPY looks bearish. The IWM clearly looks bearish as well. And let's also now go ahead and take a look at the large tech stocks to get a better view of the market. All right, so Apple, we broke down below and closed below this very important uptrend line. All right, the RSI still has more room to go to the downside, and the MACD is still not oversold. Yet we closed below a very important uptrend level. So this is clearly not a bullish sign for Apple. That's why I was saying that and the fact that this lower level of the Bollinger Band we're not even near it. So that is very bearish for Apple, in my opinion. So that's why, you know, there's a big chance that we continue falling lower. That's why I said the lotto puts or longer term calls. And this is not a good sign for Apple. Let's just go through the rest of them. Microsoft, yes, Microsoft did close outside the lower level of the Bollinger Band. Yet the RSI still has more room to the downside, and the MACD just had its first day crossing down below. Okay, so usually when that happens, there is usually another day following us crossing down below, and you can see we barely crossed down below. So there's still more room to the downside here as well. And, you know, it wouldn't be completely out of character for Microsoft to have another day or two even outside the lower level of the Bollinger Band. So Microsoft is showing good overextension. I tweeted that earlier in the day, but it's not enough overextension. All right, so we can also see the same concept in Amazon, but first, go ahead and take a look at Google. Google is also closed outside the lower B band. It's not yet oversold on the MACD, right? There's still more room to the downside on the MACD, and the RSI is still not oversold either. So this is a good sign. It's basically telling me that there is one more day, maybe 2 more days, depending on if they like. So, all right, so look, this is basically what I think should end up happening in the overall market. We should fall heavily tomorrow and basically just bounce upwards. But if we don't bounce upwards afterward, what's going to end up happening is we're going to fall, bounce to resistance, and then on what day? Probably on Wednesday, we fall even lower. And then once people become very, very bearish down here, that's when we would bring it up. But it all depends on how much pain they want to cause to retail. So Google is overextended to the downside. There's still more rooms to the downside in terms of the technical indicators for Google as well. And Amazon also closed very, very far outside the lower level of the Bollinger Band. Yet there's still we're still not oversold on the RSI, which is terrifying. Even though we had huge red days, I was showing how this was very, very bearish. And it's basically showing that we can have a repeat of this sort of movement here. And that would be great. So that's what I'm saying. In a perfect world, it would be nice if we opened up even lower tomorrow and had an opportunity to just buy the dips on everything. So, but, you know, obviously that's not 100% the case, right? So another thing to look at is the MACD is falling lower now. And remember, I was showing on Sunday, when the MACD lines are parallel like this, it's terrifying. And it's very, very bearish. So, you know, clearly it worked out, right? But now the fact that this RSI is still not oversold yet is a very, very scary thing as well. It means that there's another move to the downside waiting to happen on Amazon. But in the longer sort of term, in the next few days, is a good sign that at least Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are now trading outside the lower levels of the Bollinger Band. And now let's go ahead and look at Tesla. Tesla is not as overextended to the downside. All right. It's still showing relative strength. This is a pretty nice bull flag still being made. With the fact that we're still holding above 800 is also still bullish. Yet we haven't crossed down below on the MACD, and the RSI is still really not anywhere near oversold yet. So hopefully this strength in Tesla, hopefully we can hold 780 as well. And this would essentially just be a good opportunity to, if Tesla can hold at 780 and the rest of the market starts bouncing, it would probably make sense to get into Tesla calls, because Tesla is showing the most strength out of the rest of the tech sector. And if the rest of the tech sector starts really, really bouncing, just the fact that we're still in this bull flag right now on Tesla means, in my opinion, that Tesla can have a very, very aggressive move to the upside. So keep that in mind. But overall, there's that for the large tech stocks. We saw that Apple still has more room to the downside, closed very, very bearishly. Tesla still technically has more room to the downside. This is also technically a very bearish close. But it's a good sign that Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are now starting to show overextension to the lower level of the Bollinger Bands. So that's why I'm saying we could have another day of red. And then it would be nice if we can bounce short term this week. All right, so there's that for the large tech stocks. Let's take a look at the 30-year bond. So very quickly, the 30-year bond is still holding above this level of support. It couldn't really continue the upward momentum. We failed at 160, so it looks like we're about to close around 159. But the fact that we're still closing above 158.22 is still a very, very important level of support to close above. And essentially, the fact that we made this huge upside move here is a good sign that the rest of the tech sector should start to begin to follow. All right. So now it's just a matter of whether we want to start trying to catch a falling knife, or we wait for another day of overextension to the downside. But usually when this happens is when we're starting to show upside potential in the bonds, yet the NASDAQ is still falling. It's a good time to start scaling into calls, because this upside strength is forward-looking, and it's basically telling us what's going to end up happening soon in the equities. But it's not an automatic buy signal. Do you understand? So it's safer to just wait and see how much lower the equities go. All right, so there's that. We can still see that we're clearly showing a lot of strength in the 30-year bond. The yellow MACD line is clearly showing upward momentum, which is very, very good. And essentially, there's that for the bonds. Let's go ahead and take a look at the NASDAQ. All right, so here is the NASDAQ. All right, so at the close, we ended up really, really falling much lower. And this is a very, very important level of support here at 324 for the NASDAQ. All right. You can see that the MACD on NASDAQ is very similar to the MACD on Microsoft in that it barely just crossed down below. So there is technically another day or two to the downside before we start to maybe bounce. Okay. The RSI is also not oversold yet, which means that there's still more room to the downside as well. So my thought process is, and another thing, the Bollinger Band is now starting to really, really sharply fall to the downside. All right, so keep your eye on this number right here. This number basically is the lower level of the Bollinger Band, okay? And we know that if we open outside the lower level of the Bollinger Band, it's a good chance that we bounce intraday. All right, it's happened every single time. And I shared a video with you guys a few weeks ago back here. It worked out, right? So now just keep your eyes on this number right here. Okay, so the Bollinger Band on March 4th was 330. Okay, today it's 326. So it is sharply falling, which means that the lower standard deviation away is sharply falling. So to get overextended to the downside on the NASDAQ, we're going to need sharp falls. So if we don't get sharp falls, we can keep on staircasing down. And if we keep on staircasing down, we can end up falling much lower. So what we want to see is, ideally, what we want to see is a nice sharp fall tomorrow at the open, and that would hopefully cause us to open outside of the new standard, the new lower level of the Bollinger Band. Probably if we can fall down below like 322, that would be nice. But again, we don't even know if that's going to be the lower standard deviation level. Like that can, I don't have the calculator on me, but that can still be within the range. Okay, so even if we were to open at 322, we can still be inside the Bollinger Band for tomorrow. Okay, so again, there's a lot more room to the downside for the NASDAQ. Just because we closed outside of the Bollinger Band is not an automatic buy signal. That's why I'm saying in a perfect world, we should fall lower tomorrow. And this is basically what I showed you guys on Google, right? But what I would want to happen. So, me personally, what I would want to happen is I would want us to really gap down below to like 319, 320. Make the process much easier for us, and we could just blindly buy dips here, and then it would rip up to the upside, right? But what they're probably going to end up trying to do is they're going to want to flip everyone bearish. And they make a lot of money once people are very fearful and they start getting into a lot of puts. Okay, so what could end up happening, I know I'm rambling, but this is some exciting stuff going on. So what could end up happening now is they can drop it down. So there's three main things. The first thing I told you guys, like, that's what I would want. I want us to sharply fall so we could just buy dips. That would be the simplest, easiest thing. If the NASDAQ opens below 320, that would be spectacular. In my opinion, right? We would need to see where the bands are at that point, but below 320, it would be a nice, awesome little buy opportunity, in my opinion. The second thing is we open lower and we come back and fill back inside the Bollinger Band, and then we close green here, and then they rip it even lower the next day, getting everyone whipsawed, basically making everyone buy calls up here, and then at the close on Tuesday, tomorrow, they make everyone buy puts, and then from here, they rip it. So that's the second thing, and that would cause a lot of pain to people. The third thing, which I don't think is as likely as the first two, is if we basically either open flat or we open green, and from here we just basically have found a bottom and continue on upwards. I don't think any of those. I don't think this happens, because that wouldn't be enough pain, in my opinion. So, yeah, I still think that there's more room to the downside from what we saw in the large tech stocks, from what we saw in the SPY and the IWM, and currently what we're seeing right now in the technicals for the NASDAQ as well. So, yeah, there's no point of really trying to force or like try to catch any bottoms just yet. The market's not going anywhere, but we have to be smart with our money. All right, so there's that, really. The other thing that we really need to look at is the crypto markets and Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a very good indicator of the overall market as well. And if Bitcoin is also showing more downside potential, then that was basically showing that everything has more room to the downside. So it's not the safest thing just yet. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at Bitcoin. There's that for the entire stock market. Yeah, man, Bitcoin looks garbage. So, so all right. So number one, this is the daily chart of Bitcoin. The MACD is staircasing down. The RSI is staircasing down. We're failing at levels of support. It looks like we're going to come back and retest this trend line at 30. So 37,500 is very important. If that fails, then we're going to come back and test 36. Then we're going to come back and test 37, right? Which is this trend line. But the way that this weakness is basically showing is it looks like we're going to come back and test 35.4. If that were to happen, then that would be an amazing buy opportunity, in my opinion, for the overall markets. Because if Bitcoin in the next 2 days, so I'm not saying this is going to happen, right? We can end up just holding 37,000. But right now, technically, the indicators are very weak. MACD is not sharply falling, which is not a good sign. And the RSI is not sharply falling either, which is also not a good sign. When we're having abrupt moves to the downside like this, yet the indicators are not showing that same abrupt, sensitivity to the downside, that means that there's still more room for a flush to the downside, okay? So that's why I think that Bitcoin can continue falling lower, all right? So if Bitcoin can fall down to 35,000 in the next 2 days, the overall stock market will be very, very overextended, and we can get some really cheap, safe calls, in my opinion. Because right now, Bitcoin is showing weakness. It needs to hold 37,000. And the way that these indicators are, it does not look like that can be the case. But again, I can be completely wrong, but it's safer to just be patient and wait. And that is really that for the overall market. Overall, everything is looking bearish unless Bitcoin shows like a lot of strength overnight. Actually, one other thing that we should look at is so China is basically going to get, slaughtered by this. The Chinese markets are really, really going to take like a huge hit from all of this. Because wheat prices are going up. And there's a lot that basically happened with them. They paid for a lot of fodder to help feed their cattle and the hogs. Yet there's like there's like a famine going on for those hogs. So coupled with the fact that all of the things are happening with Russia, China basically paid for a lot of grain and like food essentially for their cattle, but the cattle are sick apparently. So China is taking a huge hit for that. Japanese market is showing tons of weakness as well because like you can see that we're closing outside the lower levels of the Bollinger Bands, yet the RSI is flat and stagnant. So that means that there's still more room to the downside before we get oversold. The FTSE still showing more room to the downside, and the DAX very overextended to the downside. So, overall everything looks very, very bearish. Literally every metric except the 30-year bonds look very, very bearish. So at the moment, things are basically showing that there is at least another day or two of weakness in the market. And from there, we're just going to be patient and wait. If for some odd reason we open up green and we start, skyrocketing, then we're going to have to adapt. And I could be completely wrong, but we're going to have to adapt and buy into the strength if for some reason we open up green and start skyrocketing. But again, it makes sense to just be patient. All right. If we start really skyrocketing and opening up green, I want to see us close above major levels of resistance before we start going long and swinging along overnight. And I also want to see strength in Bitcoin. I want to see continued strength out of the 30-year bonds. But also the fact that the VIX is just skyrocketing here, it does look like we can have at least another day of weakness. The VIX is not yet trading outside of the upper level of the Bollinger Band very dramatically. So everything is really pointed to at least another day or 2 of downside, that'd be great because I didn't load up into calls as heavily as I wanted to. So I hope that we fall a bit lower tomorrow. That would be great. And then I hope we fall even lower the next day. That would be even better. But yeah, aside from that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Make sure to comment, like, subscribe to the channel, and put on post notifications. And yeah, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.